okay, well now I have to redesign the game and I have to add all these cards to make it work. And since I was already kind of in the sort of medieval to industrial revolution era, I just kind of leaned into, Victorian industrial revolution because it's gritty and surprising number of women killing husbands and other family members for life insurance. Actual life insurance, which doesn't feel Victorian, so we don't call it that in the game.
What do you call it?
We just call it inheritance, I think, yeah. You get money from the will or whatever.
How does it play mechanically? What do you do with the cards?
Right, so it's hand drafting, so a little bit Sushi Go, Seven Wonders, and then tableau building, which was supposed to be kind of Citadels-esque. I was like, the thing I enjoyed about Citadels that I think is sort of underappreciated is actually the tableau building, not the hook is the card killing people and all that stuff. But I wanted to explore the tableau building because I'm early in my design journey and that seems like a good place to start. But then you refresh the tableau when you kill your husband, so some of the stuff goes away and you're able to start over because you're cashing out. Because the only time you can get income is when your husband dies because you're a woman, you don't have rights. And so there's a lot of ideas being explored there with is society the bad guy? Are the women the bad guys? Yes. But I did write probably more than 5 sentences for a little starter story. Yeah.
It sounds like that game would be very hard to retheme.
Yeah, so I was expecting.
Could you play it mechanically without the theme? Does it even work?
Right. I was expecting someone to be like, well, maybe the refreshing tableau drafting game, but please retheme it. But they didn't have to cross that bridge. I was also not expecting people to respond to it as positively as they did. I was focused on the capitalism aspect, that how did the rich people get rich and become the capitalists of the modern era, and I wasn't focused on the women playing this game as catharsis for the bad bosses and ex-boyfriends in their lives. But until I started playtesting it, and then I realized what my target audience was and leaned into that a little bit. So the game kind of does both, which is a weird tension from an analysis standpoint, but most people don't. They just know it's fun.
Customizable blank cards is add-on.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a connective tissue between the Dowagers and Guillotine, and that kind of bracing macabre theme. Let's turn a spotlight on a period of history and say, how can I realize this mechanically in front of you so that you kind of feel it?
And this is a preview for a Ludology episode because I'm writing it right now. When people who had already played this game were trying to get more playtesters to come over, they would go up to people and they would say, do you want to play a game where you kill your husband? And everyone was like, no, what is wrong with you? That sounds awful. And then I would have to be like, wait. Do you want to play a game where you're a Victorian woman who kills her husband to marry richer men? And they're like, yes, of course I do. Just heel turn. Of course I want that. And so this game, is this too visceral, too real life for you? What about this? It's dialing into what your audience finds acceptable, historical remove, that kind of stuff. And we know this because sci-fi and fantasy, that's how they deal with real life topics. People in the board game industry occasionally talk about sci-fi and fantasy as a way to get away from politics, to not have to worry about getting in trouble because Istanbul doesn't have women on the card art, which is true. It's got 50 men characters and no women because people didn't notice. And no, that's not how sci-fi and fantasy are meant to be viewed. That's not how they work. You use the remove of real life to be able to tell people truths without having them instantly get defensive about things. that's like people talk about all speculative fiction is based in what oppressed groups are currently experiencing, not a far future thing. So I definitely, like, I don't try to push that too hard, but I feel like people need to consider messages in your theme, mostly because that helps shape the experience. So like, I don't expect people to think too much about the capitalism stuff in here, but but there is, like, even unintentionally, which at first it kind of was unintentional, the sort of women behaving badly version of female liberation exists in here, and it's up to me to shape how that story is told rather than just be slapdash about it, in order to make a fun game that speaks to people and also ends up having messages I can stand behind and I don't want to distance myself from. But yeah, I also think it's the best hook I will ever come up with, so it's a pity it was my first game.
Why will?
I don't think I'm ever gonna top
Okay.
Victorian women killing their husbands to marry richer men. I don't think I'll ever top that. The tagline that I put on the sell sheet was "Marry, bury, inherit, invest," and my husband suggested to BGG that the tagline needs to be "Marry, bury, inherit, repeat."
That's great.
So yeah.
That's really cool. I've got to
Yeah,
be
go
at
ahead.
the table at 11 to play the game. But this
Did
was
somebody
really
else
great.
have something that they wanted to? I don't know. There were a bunch of hands, and I don't know if we addressed everything or not.
Did you have your questions still, or you?
I forget, it's long, I'll think of it.
I guess my question might be pretty basic because I'm new to this, but like, as far as like mechanics for theme, how do you make the decision, like when to like give in, like let go of some of the theme just to make it connected less clogged? It's like, oh, this makes more sense thematically, but it's clogging up the mechanics. Like so far for me, it seemed obvious, but I don't know. Like I could be wrong.
No, I think yeah, a lot of it's intuition and playtesting, because if the playtesters don't use your language, you might be over theming, or it might not be evocative enough. So there's the case of, is the theme too cerebral? Sushi Go, pick and pass drafting game, passing the cards represents being at a conveyor belt sushi restaurant. Okay, intellectually, sure. Experience-wise, nobody gets that. Nobody. But they fixed it. They've already fixed the game. I don't need to. Sushi Roll exists, where you have chunky dice, and they're on little cardboard conveyor belt pieces that slide around the table. That's great. I think it's brilliant. I haven't bought it yet. I need to buy every game that's in here. I only have some of them. But like, they fixed it. One of my examples is King of Tokyo, where I think it's an almost perfectly themed game, except for the 1, 2, and 3 on the die. But you could theme that. Those could be people that you eat. But do you want to? You probably don't want to. But if you wanted it to be perfectly themed, you could. You know? So it's like, is that too for what the game is? Probably. But I think it's good idea.
And on that same note, for like the rule book when you're writing it, how much of the theme should you be bringing in when you're like describing like the rules for the mechanics? Like, is that helpful? Like for me, when I'm thinking about it from a design perspective, I'm like, I feel like this would help me remember that I need to do this thing. But then it's a longer rule book, so like, does that bog it down too much?
So, I mean, there's two ends of the spectrum, and one of them is no theme, and one of them is when I was judging for Cardboard Edison the first year that I judged, there was a rule book that was incomprehensible because it was written in third-person prose. It took me an hour to discern how to read this rule book. That's not good for like a 20-minute game. It's not good. So usually you can have like a little blurb. This one's even maybe a little too long, but it's also the inciting incident. So I think you can go a little longer if your little storylet or thematic description at the beginning of the game is also the inciting incident of why you're doing the things you're doing in the game. And then this also has an overview, so like the less flowery version of what the game is about, and then the objective.
So could you just, at the beginning, just have the thematic language, and then for the actual like rules, teach when you're getting into the mechanics, maybe could you use some of the same terminology maybe?
Yeah, so you use terminology as needed, so like sometimes you need your, if you have different card decks, this is a huge thing in games, you need them to be obvious what they are. And so like, if you've got farm art on the cards, then it's a farm card, that's fine. But if it's the objective deck, you might need to make it very clear in your rulebook which deck is the objective deck. For my game, husbands, farms, that kind of stuff, it's very straightforward. So the language needs to serve, if it's not adding clarity, it's making it worse. Theming wheat turns into flour, turns into bread, helps people remember the rules and serves the theme of the game. But some, especially with like sci-fi games, they'll just make up icons that are just pretty and they don't mean anything and they don't look like what they represent. It's like, I'd rather see a little lightning bolt symbol to represent energy than some sort of weird sci-fi looking thing, because it doesn't help me learn the game. I'm trying to find an example.
Sometimes you'll see rules that have clearly been edited, and there's two different names for the same thing, and this all of a sudden this name pops up, and you're like, what are they talking about? And it's nowhere else, you're like, oh.
So here, where it talks about adjusting your infamy, there's a little parenthetical for why this is true, and that's a thematic reason. So we have a little bit of that peppered through, and then we've also got like, these are just real life women who murdered people that are added in. That was the but always remember that flavor stuff is always optional and people will ignore it.
Yes.
And so if you want a thematic game, you have to have it be in the stuff that there's opt-in stuff and then there's baked-in stuff, and it has to be baked in.
I think you mentioned already, but I love the theme where it's metaphor, and it makes sense because, like you said, the wheat to bread is like, oh, I intuitively understand that. That's thematic to me. I love when that happens, because then I don't need to learn rules. I just am like, I know what throwing the trash is. When I throw the trash, I throw the card into a trash can.
I again, and just because this game I know the best, that was a huge thing in this game where women intuitively knew what a dowry was, and my male playtesters did not. And so it was a very strange experience where people who had played fewer games but grew up reading Jane Austen were better at learning these rules than the people who had played more games, in part because I had subverted some of their expectations, like there's no income phase. Sorry, you can't get money at the end of the round. Well, why not? You're a woman. You can't. It's not allowed.
I don't remember the term for it, but it was when you take your preconceived understanding of a concept and move it to gaming. You like bring it with you, it's like preloaded or something.
Yeah.
The wrong word, but it's so
that
nice.
sounds right. Players come preloaded with their
I think
knowledge
you
about
actually-
the
yeah,
world.
talk about that. And it was like, you might as well tap into that.
I've talked about that before. I haven't used the word, but I've heard other people use the word preloaded.
Earlier you said you felt like co-op games were cheating a little bit. For instance, can you talk about?
Cheating.
Thanks,
Okay.
Sarah.
You can be more thematic in a co-op game because it's all the players versus the game. And so you can do more ridiculous stuff. It can be more splashy and out there because everyone is banding together against the game. And when you're doing competitive stuff, you have to worry more about fairness. So you can do more with events in co-op games because you don't have to worry about fairness as long as
It's affecting everyone.
yeah, as long as you're not like kicking somebody out of the game really early, but everybody else keeps playing. And event cards are a thing that people have struggled with because some people really hate events, and I think a lot of that has to do with the way they've been used in competitive games. Some people really love them. Those people who probably play games like Arkham Horror. But so the levers are different. How you're allowed to use them is different, and it's because where the players are mentally is very different. And I think if you can design a really thematic, competitive game, that is a greater achievement than a cooperative game.
Yeah. I totally see where you're coming from. I wonder if also like real life is very high variance and has tons of surprises, and those are often the most exciting and emotional and interesting moments in real life. So then when you try to translate real experiences to a game through the theme,
You can do that in a co-op.
you can include that high variance and surprise in co-op. It becomes hard to include the high variance and surprise that is probably true to your theme, but then subverts a like sort of chess-like baseline that people want to start from.
Yeah, in a competitive game because of fairness. It's a fairness mentality for the most part.
I like thinking about, you know, like Jeff Engelstein's input-output randomness sort of situation of like, is more of the uncertainty happening before or after your key decisions. And I think it's interesting because in real life, there's a tremendous amount of output randomness, right? There's a tremendous amount of like having to commit to a decision and not knowing if the weather will be good or not knowing if tariffs will change, or like we deal with tremendous output randomness in real life. I think it's one of the reasons why war games are often really thematic is they use output randomness in very realistic ways. After you make a decision, you don't know if like who's going to win the battle or whatever. But in strategic games, there's a low tolerance for output randomness, which I think hinders thematic integrations.
Yeah, I'm toying with the idea of like in-turn math versus out-of-turn math.
Okay.
If you have to do a whole lot of calculation while you're taking a turn in order to take your turn, I think you're going to dilute your theme. But if you're paused waiting for your turn to happen, and while you're paused, you're planning your turn and doing some calculation to see what the best option will be, and what other people are doing, that is less detrimental. I also think it slows down your game less. I don't like math as a personal thing. I think that mathy games are important. The full spectrum of games is important. I like abstract games. But I'm bad at math, and it gives me a headache if I have to do too much. So.
But that comment could apply to anything like chaining cards or, you know, going right or going left. And what are my choices from that point? It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be mathematics.
Right, but for me, we use the term mathing out your turn for like getting the biggest return on investment.
Right.
So that I have a hard time playing like Lost Cities, Knizia scoring stuff, because there's like 2 layers of math to it rather than one.
So would you say a well-integrated game is one where each mechanical thing you do makes sense in terms of that theme?
Yeah.
Kind of like you're saying, the taking versus the giving of those cards seem to be contrary to the idea of a love letter.
Yeah. Yes. I think that some of it is like in aggregate. The actual like card movement in this game and the math, like on the surface, you would not think it's that thematic, but because it's so narrowly focused on this one scene, and it barely has any like flavor, description at the beginning. But I'm increasingly, I believe that when you harness what players are already gonna feel, the type of tension, the type of emotion, and you theme that will make your game feel the most thematic. And mechanics is how you get there, and it also serves other purposes. It helps you learn the rules and all that stuff. But like the central tension in the first third or so of Deadly Dowagers is loss aversion versus goal gradient effect, where I picked out a husband before the game started. That's my husband. My brain has an association with the word husband. That's a very positive thing, but I knew before I started playing what this game was about. I don't want to lose this card that gives me special power, and it's got a portrait on it, and that's my husband. But I'm out of money, and I can't play any more turns if I don't kill him. And that tension is, you know, I could have tried to design it out of the game, but I decided that no, it's serving the theme, so we're keeping it. And then every subsequent death, that tension's gone, because it's not a husband that you've had since the beginning of the game. You're already used to the idea of killing him. And I'm like, well, I could try to design to increase that tension back to what the first husband was, but actually, like, morally, it lines up, right? It tracks. It is thematic. It's also what happens in player psychology. And if you can make what happens in player psychology feel thematic, even as the theme is kind of consciously fading the more you play, but if you reflect on it, you go, oh, no, actually that makes sense.
I ran into tension issues with my game when the first time I presented it to playtesters. I had playtested with all the family, friends, everyone. I thought that I had, finished. And when I did, I found out the tension was too much. It was negative. And my book theme, you could steal a book from somebody's bookshelf and all this stuff. And they were like, oh no, that's taboo. You cannot do that. Your theme is this theme, and you have to go with the tension level with this. Yeah, and you can't violate that in here because you won't.
Because you would have to set it up before they start playing that we are cutthroat book traders at a convention. You would have to set it up. You can't just add it in.
Black Friday. Maybe the framing opportunity. It could be like secret borrowing. When a friend is like, I'm gonna borrow this book, but I forgot to ask. And they're like, why is that spot on my shelf?
But you have to be intentional about those sorts of things. They can't just surprise the players, because players don't like that thematic surprises that feel like they're out of the theme that they were in.
That was a very emotional draw on the other side,
Yeah, I had people constantly telling me, I need balls, I need rumors and backstabbing and gossip and like courtship. I need more of that stuff in this game, and they would not lay off. And so I added affair cards, and I added one gossip card for the entire deck, and the complaints went away. It's like just a little bit more of something traditionally feminine, because I wanted there to be no sex in this game. It was all business. Having female characters conducting business that includes murder. And the marital relationships from the women's perspective is a business contract. But people wouldn't let up, so I added which is oftentimes with theme, you just need like just enough to feel right. It doesn't have to be dripping, but it's you just need enough to push you over into things.
I really noticed that sometimes your playtesters will often tell you if there's a glaring expectation that didn't get met.
Yes.
And then sometimes it's the tiniest little salt that can add that. But maybe even like just renaming one thing on the board.
Yeah.
But then to your point, like I think often you only need a couple super thematic things for people to come away with it feeling like it's a really thematic game. Like people are used to playing games that are this thematic, and so if you have one or two thematic home runs in your game, many people will be like very impressed.
This small tweak thing, I was just thinking, there's a trick-taking game that I tested. It's based on the theme of donating blood and matching blood types. And there's a simple mechanic where you put this card next to this card, and if all the arrows are blocked by all the shields, it's safe to donate. If any arrows are getting through, the mechanic is very simple. Not hard to teach, not hard to understand. But because it's themed as this scientific blood donation thing, I had a couple test people who played, and they all of a sudden were transported back to that terrible feeling in high school science when they didn't understand what was going on, and they panicked and they hated it. And they didn't want me to explain how simple it was, like they just wanted to get out of there. And I thought, oh.
I've had that.
Do I fix that, or do I just say this game just isn't for everyone? I've
had that with with music terminology. People are like, I don't know for music theory, and I'm like, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. That's too much music theory for you. I can't do it. Can't do it. Don't know that. I don't know those terms. I'm like, okay, so if I made up gobbledygook, you'd be fine with it. But because it's a real term and it reminds you of being in school, you can't do it.
I thought I would have that issue with the book theme because I thought people would say, well, I don't read and I don't like books, and which is not, you don't have to know about books. I mean, it was like it, some people thought at the beginning it was just a test on the knowledge of the books. But once, yeah, so once they found out it's not about that, it's about trading, collecting books and all of that, they were fine with it, so.
So, quick question. I am planning on talking about the Guillotine King of Tokyo thing in an upcoming Thinking Beyond Mechanisms. Am I gonna get myself in trouble? Because it sounds like people were like, but it's published the way it is for a reason. I'm gonna try and couch it a little bit more in it's gonna be an episode on thematic contextualization and how, so my other examples of further changing it is what if you keep the guillotine but you get rid of French nobles and their care bears? And then what if you have the care bears but then you get rid of the guillotine and it's like the Space Munchkin Banana Fana Faux Phaser laser? And how do those different contextualizations feel? I don't think murdering care bears is very fun. I don't think that's the one. That's not the winner.
No, my point was just that a couple of these seems like love letter and guillotine, like your theme does intersect with your marketing, and a couple of them are very marketable, even if they don't lead to great play experiences, and that's sort of interesting. And some audiences, like young adults, might also like a theme that 80% of adults would not like as much, which is also sort of interesting.
The fact that what I consider what we make to be commercialized art, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way because I think movies are more accessible than live shows, which I think is a compelling reason to tape and air Broadway shows instead of taping them and then hiding the tapes where only researchers are allowed to watch them, which is what they do now. So I think it makes it accessible. I could, like I told somebody yesterday, I could do 20 minutes on why what we do is important. And I think what we do is important. But yeah, marketing is a thing, and I think strong thematic hooks can help. But it's also, I'm less concerned about that because I'm trying to how does gravity as a concept get conveyed via mechanics in games? That's where I'm at. So I'm a little less. I've written about hooks before, in terms of just thematic hooks mostly, and I do pay attention to that stuff, but it can be a headache. But that's the reason I don't publish games, is I don't want to have to think about that. I want to find people who, gosh darn it, they want to publish my New Year's Eve Scottish game. I just, somebody else figure out. I'm taking that one of my dexterity game to Gamma, and maybe I can get some movement on them.
I really like it a lot.
I think that particular change, it's a little tricky with the words integration because the guillotine does fit with the peasants.
Right.
But the French thing, so when you put a dinosaur in there, it's kind of like, wait a minute.
It is.
It's that doesn't match.
It is less integrated, but it's
So-
also like it is less integrated to the historical era and to the title.
There's less
But
cars.
I think it's still integrated, right? In terms of a line of people marching to their death, and you just changed the type of death.
Right.
It's not integrated.
Yeah, and maybe they're tropical, peasants on an island somewhere.
Right. You're right. You can make it consistent.
Yeah.
I think absurdism can also be absurdist themes can also be integrated with mechanics.
Yeah, okay.
This is not very integrated. This is mostly math with a little dusting of theme on top.
Dressing it.
So that's the difference.
This makes a lot of sense. The episode you want to do is about games that are pretty thematically integrated, but it might be a mismatch in the context, or they could be better contextualized.
No, not that. I'm not trying to necessarily improve games. I'm trying to get people to think about how context shapes the emotional content. That's all. Is because trying to get people to believe me that themes have emotional content and that the setting is often what shapes that, not the subject, can be tricky. So I'm making that argument.
But it sounds like you're saying it's a good thing if there's emotional. Because like this dandelions thing, as soon as you open the box and pull the parts out, they're all abstract. I haven't looked at it. okay, yeah, it said dandelions, that's why I bought it, because it was pretty. But now that I'm inside it, I've forgotten the theme completely. I have no emotion.
You could easily forget that they're dandelions because but it's naturey and it's pretty, and I feel like dandelions lets you know there's not a story here. you know there's not a story here, because how can you make a story out of dandelion fluff? You know there's a story here, and the game delivers on the story. You know there's a story here. So I do think biggest thing, and we probably need to wrap up because I'm a little over even what they said I could go over. I think the biggest thing is matching audiences' expectations to what it's going to be. If you promise a big theme and there's not, that's a problem.
Right.
I think that, not all games need to be super themed, but the more we explore how to theme games, the more we're moving the art forward in that direction. And I feel like we already know how to make lightly themed games, and so I don't know why I would talk about it. There's nothing to talk about. We know how to do that. It is my nemesis.
Do you know Dan Thoreau, his Spaceman reviews?
Yes.
Does he bother you all?
No.
He just
Only.
has interesting takes about theme, what he thinks it should be called setting.
Yes, that. He said that on Mythology, and that was what that's where I immediately go to. So Dan Thoreau, Space Div, thinks that theme should be called setting. He thinks theme is setting. The Decision Space podcast guys, whose names I can't remember, think that
Paul, Pete,
Brendan and somebody, something like that. They think that theme should be called setting.
Marcus.
I just read here.
Dan
I mean, either
thinks
way,
that
either
theme
way.
should be called setting. I think that theme is already being used by gamers.
So broadly, yeah.
Well, no, not broadly. They are using it specifically to mean both.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that. I meant like the theme is so widely used. The word is so widely used.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yes, they're already using a definition, so I formalized the definition that I believe is already in use.
I agree with your position on that. I think Dan Thoreau, he sort of likes having out there takes because he's like a philosophy guy, and I love his writing, but I think he almost enjoys like being a little off.
I think I wrote my blog post about defining theme in reaction to that Mythology episode.
Oh, nice. There you go.